Right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate everybody is extremely busy and you've got other things to do. Probably most of you are currently trying to change your mortgages, perhaps, amongst other things. So I appreciate your time this morning. My name is Stephen Parkinson. I'm a Research Partnership Manager for the N8 Research Partnership. And this is the first in a series of webinars which we hope will support the development of the next stage of the Child of the North initiative, which is a joint initiative between the N8 Research Partnership and the Northern Health Science Alliance. So the purpose of these webinars is twofold, effectively. Firstly, it's to hear from the universities across the N8 Research Partnership about the range of current research activity, both working with and in support of children, young people and families within their local areas and across the north of England and beyond. And we hope this will both raise awareness of what is going on in this area across our members, but also may lead to new connections being made and new collaborations formed, we hope. Secondly, though, we also wanted to start a discussion about how this ongoing activity can inform and support development of a future strategy for Child of the North, both as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic and yet at the same time find further crises affecting our children and young people almost on a daily basis, as it seems at the moment. So as I say, I'm delighted that today we're joined by colleagues from universities of Newcastle and Leeds to tell us about some of their research and other activity underway at their universities in this area. However, we also want you all to contribute today as much as possible. There'll be opportunity to ask questions after each of the presentations, and then we'll have an open discussion at the end of the session in which we want to hear from you about what you think the priorities for Child of the North should be moving forward. So I will just pop up the agenda so we can see the full agenda for the day. One second. There we go. So I'll start off, I'll give a brief introduction and background to Child of the North, which some of you may be aware of and some of you not. Then we'll follow by a presentation from Newcastle about their current research activity, followed by the Q&A and presentation from Leeds, followed again by Q&A, and then, as I say, finishing off with a discussion about the Child of the North future strategy development. Before we do kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're recording the session. This is so we can capture details of both the Q&A sessions and the discussion in full, so that these can be fed into future strategy development process. We also may make the recording available to those unable to attend today's session. Just to note that we're not using the standard Zoom webinar format, so if you could submit your questions via the chat function, we'll pick these up during the Q&A sessions. And during the general discussion section, again, you can use the chat function to make any comments or to raise any questions, but you could also use the raise hand function if you want to ask any questions as part of the discussion. My colleague Nick Goldspink is joining me today, and he'll help field some of the questions and some of the comments as we go along. So before we move into the first of our presentations, I just want, by way of setting a bit of context, I want to say a few words about the background to Child of the North and how we've got to where we are today. First thing to say is that the Child of the North is a joint initiative between the N8 Research Partnership and the Northern Health Science Alliance. We're effectively sister organisations in that we share a membership of the 8 most research-intensive universities in the north of England, which is Durham, Lancaster, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, Sheffield, and New York. The N8's goal is to promote deeper collaboration between our universities, business and society, whereas the NHSA is a health and life sciences partnership between leading NHS trusts, universities and academic health science networks in the north of England. And as an organisation, they work with their members, industry and government to mobilise the North's assets for the benefit of people and the economy. Child of the North represents a key collaboration between the two organisations, recognising the common interest in tackling health inequalities and better understanding and drawing attention to the social determinants of health, particularly in children. So Child of the North was conceived actually before the pandemic took hold as a means of combining and elevating the enormous amount of excellent and impactful research that takes place across the north of England in relation to children and young people and the experience of growing up in the north. And sort of midway through the pandemic, we developed this vision for what Child in the North may look like, which is to develop a platform for collaboration, high quality research and policy engagement that will improve the lives of all children living in the north of England in a post-pandemic age. And that sort of is our guiding star, if you like. In terms of how we've got to where we are today, so Child in the North first emerged as part of a priority setting process within the N8 Research Partnership late in 2019. It emerged as a new priority area in recognition of the potential critical mass of expertise across our universities and the opportunity for genuine impact on a regional scale. Now, soon after that, obviously, we were all had our lives thrown in the air by COVID, and we had to think about how that affected what we were doing with Child of the North. We had an initial scoping workshop in autumn 2019, and we started to develop some priority areas. As I say, COVID sort of overtook us in a way. So we had to think about recalibrating our vision to an extent and deciding what we could do, focus on what we could do now as a collective of universities to improve the lives of children in both during the pandemic and in a post-pandemic age. At the same time, we came up with the idea of appointing a set of institutional champions, which is 1 to 2 individuals per university, and they were nominated to provide a key point of contact at each institution. And you'll meet some of those today during our presentations, and hopefully in the future events in the series as well. There'll be other institutional champions talking about work at their universities. However, the scale and urgency of the pandemic and the impact it was clearly having on children very immediately meant we decided to pivot away from development of a large programmatic activity towards doing something that we could do rapidly to respond to the crisis caused by the pandemic. And this led initially to the idea for a Child of the North report, which was published ultimately in December 2021. So I'll talk a little bit about that now. So the Child of the North, Building a Fairer Future After COVID-19 report was the first output from Child of the North, and it was also the first stage of our new partnership between the N8 and the NHSA. The report itself was a huge group effort of over 40 authors from across the N8 universities, but also the Northern Arcs, the Applied Research Collaborations, the Northern NHS Trusts, the Bradford Institute of Health Research, and also universities of Bradford, Imperial College and Oxford. Our lead authors were Kate Pickett from York and David Taylor Robinson from Liverpool, and the report itself covered quite a wide range of areas, as you can see there, from child poverty through mental health, pregnancy in early years, and through to children in care, ethnic minority children, and children's rights. So the purpose of this report was to try capture the impact of the pandemic on children growing up in the North and their experience of it. In doing so, it also unavoidably looks back at the impact of a decade of austerity on the lives of children in the North and the inequalities this had highlighted, and how the pandemic was further exacerbating these inequalities. We were very keen in the report to emphasise how vital it is to keep the voices of children and young people themselves at the heart of the COVID-19 pandemic recovery strategies and the levelling up agenda. With this in mind, the report uses a range of case studies and stories to foreground individuals' experiences and best practice policies and interventions that had arisen during the pandemic itself. Although time and space constraints prevented us from devoting chapters to all groups of children and young people who might have special or additional needs, our policy recommendations were broad and deep enough that if enacted in a timely fashion and at scale, they could profoundly improve the health, well-being and life chances of all children. So this quote here, just to touch on some of the findings of the report, this came from the report's introduction. It pointed out that the pandemic, as we said, has exacerbated existing problems for families in the North, particularly in terms of increasing poverty and family stress at a time of restricted access to protected environments, including schools and supportive services. So we clearly drew attention to the fact that poverty is a lead driver of inequalities between children in the North and their counterparts in the rest of the country, leading to worse physical and mental health outcomes, educational attainment, and lifelong economic productivity. As we all know, the pandemic has exacerbated a number of these problems, and although the full impact is still not known, modelling suggests that without intervention, the outlook is bleak. To address the North-South productivity gap, we must tackle the stark inequalities evidenced in the report, put in place a child-first, place-based recovery plan, and enable the children of the North to fulfil their potential. Again, just some more snapshots of the findings of the report. And so throughout, we were keen to avoid avoid painting a picture of northern exceptionalism, if you like. We accept that the vulnerabilities and inequalities found in the north also affect children in other parts of the country, including London and even the southeast. However, it's through looking at the north as a whole that we feel that a clear picture of those inequalities emerges. In simple terms, children in the north get quite a bad deal. There's higher levels of poverty, a lack of investment, and a series of lopsided policy choices mean northern children are more at risk of a range of adverse health and well-being outcomes than their non-northern counterparts. And if levelling up is to work, if it still exists, it must address these issues. I won't dwell on this too much, but we had a series of 18 recommendations emerging from the report, covering, as I say, across all the areas of the report itself. And one of the things we want to discuss as part of future strategy development for Child of the North is how we can ensure that some of these recommendations are taken forward as part of government and local government policy. So that's the look back, if you like, and coming more up to date now. Following the launch of the report in December last year, we had a parliamentary launch for the report in March this year, which was hosted by Liz Twist, who is the MP for Blaydon. We had a good turnout in terms of number of MPs, including Bridget Phillipson, who's Shadow Secretary of State for Education, Emma Lill-Buck, Kim Ledbetter, and Andy MacDonald, among others. And one direct result of that parliamentary launch was a proposal to set up a Child of the North all-party parliamentary group. The APPG, which will launch in mid-October, will hold inquiries looking in more detail at issues raised in the Child of the North report, starting with the cost of living crisis. So the inaugural meeting and the first evidence session of that is scheduled for the 19th of October. And again, Kate Pickett and David Taylor Robinson are central to the academic input to the APPG. So we're delighted that they are doing that. At the same time as the APPG, as I say, and the reason we're here today is we're now looking to develop a future strategy for Child of the North that ties together both areas of research, but also policy engagement, including the APPG itself, to provide a focus for the Child of the North's future activities. So thinking about that future strategy development, the Institutional Champions Group has come up with a proposed aim for what that strategy could cover, which is to support recovery from the pandemic and related shocks for children, particularly the most disadvantaged, growing up in the north of England. And the purpose of developing this strategy is to identify those areas where we can find the greatest additional benefits of the NHSA and many other partners across the region working together. Or to put it more simply, what is it that we can do collectively that we cannot do alone? And again, the purpose of these webinars is a first stage on this process. So to develop a greater shared understanding of what we're currently doing in these areas and where the potential points of connection and collective strengths are. And through this series of webinars, we hope to build up this picture, which will in turn inform the development of this strategy. Obviously, as I say, we recognise this cannot be about research alone. Enhanced policy advocacy and engagement is a key asset of our working collectively together as organisations across the region. The other key thing I'd like to point attention to is that through the strategy development, we can make a case for investment by the N8 Research Partnership to build and sustain capacity in this area. So we're not looking for the N8 to fund research on a grand scale, but we can look to build a capacity to attract other external funding to keep and to build our capacity and to build our research profile and our policy advocacy. So a key aspect to keep in mind is that the reason we're doing this is so that we can make a case to really start getting some momentum ahead of steam behind this in terms of resourcing as much as anything. So I will stop at that point. And I will ask whether anybody at this stage has any questions about anything I've said so far. I'll take that as a no. In which case, I will now pass on to Liz, Todd, and Judith, I think, from Newcastle to present.
Hello, yes, to Liz, and Judith is here, and as are some other people from Newcastle who can pitch in, although we only have 10 minutes, which is going to be the issue. I'm just going to share my screen. just to work out. Okay, can you see my presentation? Yeah, good, great. Okay, so when Stephen and Judith and Mark and a few others were talking about all of us meeting together from across the north from the N8 universities, we first of all started an online conversation about what kind of research we would do. And that led to thinking, well, actually, we need to meet for a whole day. And then we thought, we met, had an online meeting to discuss how to do this day's meeting. And we realized that we knew very little about each other's research in different universities. We also realized that we couldn't get all of you guys and other people together for a day and just spend the time hearing about each other's research, because basically you'd all come together and spend the time listening and then go away again. But it's still a phenomenal kind of task how to actually get across what the research is that we've been doing, and try to bring, the idea is to go through some of this and work out what research is happening in the different universities, and then work out what could we therefore be doing, what's the best way to focus our minds on the kinds of research we want to do. And it's still going to be almost impossible, because we had this idea that this kind of session, and the reason I'm spending some of my 10 minutes having this conversation before I get onto my 11 slides, which I'll have to rush through, is because we wanted to have this bit of time when you all came to these sessions, so that you could see who turns up and actually talk a bit on the chat, and please do come up with questions. Please do take part, because a bit of networking is really needed, so that people feel there's a point to meeting up face to face. This isn't just an information giving. If this was information giving, we could just, I could have sat in here and recorded a 10-minute thing about Newcastle research. So this is about, you saying what you think, saying what's caught your attention, telling us about your research. And then, so I'm going to move on to what I'm saying about Newcastle. So here are just some of the key areas. And what I did was, we've got a new large research centre to do with children and young people. And I put out a call and I'm part of the distributed leadership of that. We have a deliberately distributed leadership, trying to be inclusive here. And I've collected different slides in different areas. And even this is actually impossible. It's certainly impossible to talk about in 10 minutes. So I'm going to whiz through it, and I'd have difficulty talking about my own area in 10 minutes, let alone 10 different areas, or however many there are here. So I'm going to give you each of the slides and just tell you the person who sent me the slide. I can't possibly, so before I get shouted down by my lovely members of my own university, I'm not aiming to say all the people in your teams, because I will get it wrong. So first thing is the slide sent in by Claire Bamborough. And basically, this is an area that you all know about. It's a massive quantitative area of different health inequalities, but it also deals with qualitative. There's lots of very interesting qualitative studies, and I've got a slide on some of those later on. And it examines inequalities in infant mortality rates, in child poverty, childhood vaccine uptake, the impact of government policies on health inequalities amongst children and young people, and the impacts on mental health. So it's phenomenally helpful to have these big level, high level quant stats for us to kind of then, certainly for me, to then frame some of my work in that. Moving on, this was sent to me by Judith, and this is another very large area of research with all kinds of people working on this. And it's the maternal and child health group at Newcastle, who use a range of methodologies to investigate sexual health, health in pregnancy, outcome for parents and infants, and child health in collaboration with parents, children, parent organisations, and through a health inequalities lens to support a best start in life. And the work is also part of the NIHR ARC, which is Applied Research Collaborations, which many of you here will know about, or some of you will be part of in our region, which is supporting the children and families theme. So again, that's a massive area of work that with all kinds of different partners. And partnerships is a characteristic of our work in Newcastle across health and the social sciences and the humanities. So another area of work, and this slide was sent to me by Janice McLaughlin, who also might well be in this call, and also by Nina Korlemanen. And this is showing the kind of fusion and meeting between sociology and health, sociology as well, public health. And policy work in this area covers, some of this area is on transitions, or that's more limited. It's looking at diversity and disabled youth transitions, a new ESRC project that involves a number of different sociologists across different universities, Glasgow, Northumbria, Newcastle. And there's an awful lot looking at the lives of disabled children, but drawing on multiple disciplines, quantitative and qualitative, but also very creative themes, looking at ideas of embodiment, intersectionality, health and participation. And then there's also this whole area of disability looking at across the social science, the health sciences, so rare diseases, neurodisability, musculoskeletal conditions, the origins, cure, etc., etc. So some really rich work going on there, but interdisciplinary. And sent to me by Professor Christina McKean, but also involving Helen Stringer, who I know is on this call, is again quite a large body of work with a large number of different funders and partnerships in language development and public health. And a lot of our work is applied and aimed at trying to do some very important empirical research, but also with a practical endpoint, which is going to help practitioners, speech therapists, teachers, policymakers, parents, schools, and children themselves. So this is all about robust effectiveness about child development and what's going to help that. Collecting large-scale cohort study data, but also evaluating interventions. And very interesting partners including Lebanon, West Bank, Jordan. We have, as I mentioned, partnership is absolutely crucial to Newcastle's work. And we have a partnership body that is part of the university, but as well as being independent. And that is the North East Child Poverty Commission. And this slide was put together by Amanda Bailey, who's the director of the North East Child Poverty Commission. And this is independent of the university, but also part of it, but also is within the School of Geography, Politics and Sociology. And it's got two overarching themes. One is giving every child, excuse me, I've got a cold, so apologies if I'm coughing. Giving every child in the Northeast the best start in life by addressing inequalities associated with poverty and preventing and reducing child poverty through good work and a strong, effective social security system. And they've just recently come out with a very important report, which you might, Amanda might be able to put in the chat, called Getting the Building Blocks Wrong, which is all about early childhood and poverty, with some really shocking statistics about preschool children and poverty. And there's a webinar coming up about that. But it's very, we also try to have a non-deficit approach to this, really, in terms of we want to say the structural poverty problems of the Northeast, but that doesn't mean that we're not also cognizant of the capacities and the abilities of people and organisations in the Northeast, and we want to really celebrate those. Just moving on my slides, and moving on to another area of work, which is from education, from the Centre of Learning and Teaching, a slide sent in by Professor Jill Clark, but also involves Professor David Leet, who's on this call, and also our colleague who used to work with us, Eric Fletcher, who I know is on the call from the Northumbria Police Commissioner. And there's a large, countless projects. I'm part of this group, countless projects we could be talking about. In this, I've just picked out 3 projects there to put on the slide. Apologies, I'm not able to stay at any of the slides for very much time, but I'm very aware that I only want to take my 10 minutes, and I don't want also to go into the time that you all would have for asking questions, because I do think this, as much as we possibly can, try to make this into a chance for networking or discussions, or just knowing who's been here. This other slide was sent in by, the previous slide was sent in by Karen Lang. This other slide was sent in by Jill Clark and shows the different methodologies, the visual methods, the co-production, the theory of change. And co-production underlies an awful lot of what we do in Newcastle. It underlies the work that happens in the ARC, in public health. It underlines the work that Amanda does. And in fact, the whole of us as a group of scholars working across these disciplines, about, tens and tens of scholars working in Newcastle in children and young people. In the summer, Janice McLaughlin, who was responsible for the disability slide, she did a fantastic piece of work with Suzanne Butler, engaging with young people to try and find out, what did young people think we as a group of scholars at Newcastle University should be researching in to do with children and young people, and how would they as young people want to be engaged with. And they contacted a large number of charities to find out the answers to that. I don't have a slide to do with that because we're not at that stage yet, but that's an important piece of research and an important collaboration that shows our seriousness about engaging young people. Very much linked to that is the work of Catherine Hollingsworth and her colleagues, Professor Catherine Hollingsworth, on children's rights in the justice process. And that's looking at children's rights in the youth justice system, and some really interesting work here where she's been trying to inform judicial sentencing practice. So drawing on the experiences of justice experienced children, she's been rewriting decisions by judges into child-friendly terms. She's been training judges to actually be able to write those judgments in different ways. And she's been trying to get judges to look at the kind of work they do with children from a child's rights perspective, which is really, changing lots of things about how justice is happening for children. So critical work. And here are three projects that I won't go into in any detail, but there are three projects from Steph Scott, who's part of public health area, working with Claire Bamborough and others. But it's to show the quality of research that this group of scholars do. ESRC projects and others, really important work that happened, some of it during COVID. And finally, final work I want to tell you about has been sent in by Lucy Pearson, and is from the Children's Literature Unit. And it is a wide range of research on children's literature. And this is really interesting. It's both looking at children's books, but also what can we learn about childhood from literacy, from different things in literacy. So for example, looking at Shakespeare, what can we learn about children's lives from how different people were writing about children in past times. So I'm going to pause there. I think I've just about managed it with my cough without coughing too much. Apologies for the run through that was really, really quick. You can all have a copy of the slides. And you might well have taken pictures already of things that interested you. But I wonder if there are any questions about particular things, or if you want me to go back to any particular slide, in which case I would be really deferring to the person on the call that would know more about that.
I think we had one question in the chat, Liz, from Julia from Leeds, asking whether there are any oral health strategies within these work streams.
Any oral health strategy?
Oral health, yeah.
I have absolutely no idea.
I can pick that up, Liz, if you want me to. So we have dental school here, but we do work very closely with in dental public health. So we do have, and I know there are a number of colleagues who are working in children's health, and especially around disabled children with disabilities and dental health, etc. So yes, there would be colleagues that we could put you in touch with. Sorry, I can't remember who you said asked the question, but if they wanted to contact either Liz or myself directly, we could share some names and some work with you.
That's great, and I lead I co-chair a central committee in the university called the Social Justice Advisory Group, which is about 60 people with people from charities, academics, professional services, and students. And there's somebody there, a senior lecturer there from dentistry, who's very keen on trying to get dentistry into the community, and that particularly involves children, because there's a massive problem of oral health in the Northeast in terms of children. I don't know the data, but it's a very shocking small number of children that have actually seen a dentist from some of the areas. Any other questions people would like to ask? Would anybody like to say anything about their own work that relates to anything that we've said? I mean, what would be great, you see, is just to hear from any of you, because we don't want this to just be, oh, this is what Newcastle did and this is what the other two universities did. So Helen Salford, thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz. That was really, really fascinating and really encouraging to see the potential synergies. I've done all of that work with Catherine Hollingsworth on children's rights judgments, and so it's.
No, that's great. And apologies for not mentioning your name.
No, not at all. I
had to sort of do the sort of disclaimer at the beginning that I knew I couldn't.
With it. No,
yes,
not at all. She's done amazing work with the magistrates. But I just wanted to ask about just in terms of the kind of our potential to work together to build capacity and sustain all of this work, and whether particular activities going on or support for, say, PhD researchers or master's researchers, because I think that's where we can probably do more. Well, I mean, I won't go into Liverpool's initiatives because we'll have time to do that at another session, but it'd just be useful to know what others are doing in relation to early career capacity building.
So in our in all of the work that I've presented, and the large research centre we now have for children and youth, that is basically encompassing all these different teams and trying to get us all talking together. We are really we're early career researchers is a central part of it, and in our leadership we have early career researchers. So we're trying to build a structure that from the beginning recognises that. We keep coming across things where we're being asked for, well, actually there's something happening at the moment where professors aren't good enough. It's got to be pro vice chancellor. So we keep coming across those kind of those sort of hierarchical issues. But we're very, very keen to work in a way that constantly involves younger staff, because there's mentoring up needed, and I have a tremendous amount to learn from everybody.
Yeah, so maybe I could just mention a couple of specific things there, Helen. We do have within the university, there's a huge investment gone into something called NEWACs, which are 5-year fellowships. So these are for early career researchers. Obviously, they're incredibly competitive, and there's not hundreds of them, but there has been a huge investment by the university it's been running for 2 or 3 years over a 5-year period. We're also part of things like the Forward North PhD, the doctoral fellowship program, which I think is between 5 of the North universities. So we do a lot of work in terms of supporting students to come through and work with us in terms of PhDs, but also to go on to the next stage in terms of their postdoctoral work. And just in case it is of interest and relevance, I chair the doctoral fellowship panel for the NIHR. And there are quite a few of us who are across the university who are involved in panels. So we do bring that expertise back and try and do sort of really good practice in supporting our ECRs when they do go for funding applications and fellowships, etc.
Thanks so much for that, because we've got a similar 5-year research fellowship scheme, and we've just recruited somebody last year who's a children's rights researcher.
Yeah, and Janice has just reminded me. We've got a child, youth and family pathway in the ESRC doctoral training programme, so that Newcastle is a partner in as well. So there's quite a lot of initiatives that we support, and obviously very keen to support and to encourage our for PhD students and also for early career researchers to progress their career. But as we all know, it is very difficult, and there aren't as much around us there as we would like. There's a link going in, so there is some chat starting to happen in some questions coming through in the chat, which is great. So shall we just pick up? Somebody was asking about the children's rights and justice process. So that was Liz was mentioning Professor Catherine Hollingsworth, who is part of our work as well. So I don't know if Tan, if that's helpful for you to. Oh, and Janice has helpfully put the link.
Janice put it in the link. Yes. Someone else put their hand up though. Who is that? It's gone down again. Oh yes. Would you like to speak? I can't work out your name from your.
Yeah. Sorry, I know it's Victorina. It's from Liverpool. Sorry.
Victorina, lovely to meet you, Victorina.
Hi, very nice. I just simply wanted to know a bit more about kind of the language work that you do, because it says language development. Obviously, you can have language development in early years, and you can have kind of pragmatic development once they've already acquired, basic command of the language. Then how they develop sensitivity for different genres, etc. Because at Liverpool, we are doing also a research on, for instance, gender gap in children's language development. And I'm not completely sure what strand are you taking, whether it's kind of more language development in the early years or later on, because we'll be very interested.
That's great. That's great to hear what work you're doing, Victorina.
Yes. Okay.
And so, Helen, I don't know, Helen Stringer, are you able at all to answer that? Sorry it's fine if you're not, because I didn't ask you, didn't sort of cute. Are you still there, Helen? Helen might not be there. I don't think Christina's there. I don't think we can answer that one, because it's only if one of our colleagues from, so let's, if you can put the question in the chat, we can take that question. And basically that's lovely to have that question, because it means that it's something that we're left with that we can try to resolve, and we can deal with it as well when we meet in person. Hopefully might be at Newcastle University, that was a possibility. That's great. And also everybody else, if you can put your questions in the chat, that would be great, because it does give us a sense then as to the kinds of things that are arising. I think I probably need to move on now, Steve, is that right?
Our other questions coming up, then put them in the chat. As I say, we will share the slides, and if there was a request to put the names to those slides for those key researchers as well. So if we were able to do that, that would be fantastic when sharing those after the fact, Liz. But thank you so much. That's quite a heroic effort to get through so much in 10 minutes. I really appreciate it. One thing I must apologise for, I forgot to do is I forgot to give you an introduction before that. So I'll make sure I won't forget to do that with Mark now. So our next speaker is Professor Mark Mon-Williams, who is Chair in Cognitive Psychology at the University of Leeds and Professor of Psychology at the Bradford Institute of Health Research. Mark is also a Turing Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Data Analytics Centre. Mark is also the director of the Centre of Applied Education Research, which is a partnership between the Universities of Leeds and Bradford, together with the DFE, the Education Endowment Foundation, and Bradford Local Authority. And that's a multidisciplinary centre based at Bradford Royal Infirmary. And finally, Mark is also an executive member of the Born in Bradford longitudinal cohort study, which has recently embarked on its latest stage called Age of Wonder, which now represents the largest adolescent cohort study in Europe, I believe, Mark. Over to you.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Stephen, and thanks so much, Liz, for a really informative sort of talk. So it really is a big thank you to Stephen and David, okay, everybody who's been really driving this forward. And for us, it's been a really great catalyst to get us to start to think about what we could and should be doing to better support children and young people across our bit of the north of England. So for me, this is a great sort of catalyst, a great opportunity for us to take a step back and think, how can we start reversing the trends that were laid out so starkly within the Child of the North report? And on reflection and discussion in our neck of the sort of woods, we sort of realised that every major organisation, every major sort of a company, every major business has an R&D department. An R&D department that really supports that business, that organisation to be maximally effective. And the question for us is, how can we as universities start playing our role as the R&D departments for all of our public organisations, whether that's the police service, whether it's the local authority, whether it's our hospital trust, whether it's our care trust, whether it's our local schools. So that's the homework question for us. How can we start being an effective R&D department to support the activities across these various organisations in order that those organisations can act in the very, very best interest of children and young people? So one of the first things that we've realised we need to do is get our own house in order. So it's absolutely wonderful to be connecting with colleagues across the north of England around research on children and young people. But actually, internally, we're pretty disconnected from each other. When we start zooming out and looking across the whole of our campus, we just see fantastic examples of wonderful, wonderful research. But that research is typically disconnected from other bits of research. And that's such a shame, because half the sort of time you put those two bits of research together, they both add value. So the question for us intern is, how can we better start connecting things up across our campus in Leeds? The other issue for us, again, by any analysis, is that we're disconnected from our systems. We sit at the top of a hill, just above the sort of local authority sort of buildings, but actually our role in supporting activities within local authority is dismal. We generate fantastic research. A number of people on this sort of call, Cecile, or sort of imagine brilliant sort of work that's got real implications for policy making, decision making across our district. But it's staying in the ivory tower, and we're not getting it into the hands of the sort of people who really need that information in order to be effective in their decision making and their policy making. So how can we start to better internally organise ourselves and become connected? How can we become better connected with our external organisations is the homework sort of a question for us right now. And we're very fortunate within Leeds, because we're just getting a new children's hospital, £600 million new build, just next door to our university sort of campus. And off the back of that new building, the Leeds Teaching Hospital Foundation Trust has asked us to develop a research centre that can focus on outcomes for children and young sort of people. Obviously quite focused on health, but we're taking a very, very broad approach to start thinking about health and well-being. And when we start thinking in those terms, we suddenly realise that all of the research across the whole campus has got a role to play in starting to think about how we can use this centre to connect ourselves up and feed all of our understanding into the wider sort of our system. So we currently have a bid for £2.5 million, an invited sort of a bid. You might think that there's some very good news heading towards us very, very soon, but I can possibly sort of comment. And that sort of a bid is to really push forward on 3 areas. So one around children's cancer, looking at translational research. A second around data linkage, so how can we innovatively link sort of data to improve outcomes for children and young people. And then thirdly, how can we start tackling all of those wider determinants of physical and mental health and social sort of well-being for our children and young sort of people. And through this process, we started to identify themes or research and development programs that we could contribute towards. So this innate sort of discussion is extremely useful to us, because it's helping us start to think about where could we develop research and development programs that we can then connect into our wider system. So this is the activity that's happening right here, right now on our Leeds campus. But we're fortunate because we've gone down this sort of a path already across in Bradford. And that's through our Centre for Applied Education Research. So over the last 5 years, we've been developing a particular methodology that allows us to connect in our wonderful academics from York University, Bradford University, Leeds University with our various organisations. And a lot of the work that we've been doing is through our Centre for Applied Education Research, which is a partnership between the Bradford Teaching Hospital Foundation Trust, our regional universities, our local authority, the Department for Education, the Educational Endowment sort of Foundation, and most importantly, the school network, our 208 schools that exist through the Bradford sort of a district. And I feel over the last 5 years, thanks to the generous support of the Department for Education, we have developed some useful methodologies that we can now replicate across in Leeds, so that not just in Bradford are we hardwiring our R&D, into the decision-making, policy-making, but we can start to do that across in Leeds so that we can really then start pushing and pulling learning. And I guess what we'd love to do is then connect that activity in Leeds and Bradford to all of the other wonderful activity that's happening across the other parts of the north of England represented through the N8. So you can read about the type of work that we do within the Centre of Applied Education Research on our website. So I would encourage you to have a look at our website because I think there are some just fantastic examples of some really innovative and creative approaches to improving outcomes for children and young people. And in the website, you will find a report that was produced, commissioned by the Department for Education, which really has got a lot of the learning that has been generated over the last sort of 5 years, and I hope that's sort of useful. You can sort of see some of the sort of things that I think have been successful, but also perhaps learn from some of our mistakes. So I would encourage everybody to have a look at that report, because I think it does lay out a potential methodology that could be really useful as we all try and work together for the benefit of children and young people across the district. Okay, if I can just very quickly reflect then on our approach on that sort of methodology. The Centre for Applied Education Research is a microcosm of the activity led by John Wright across the Bradford area. And it's all about partnership working. It's all about us putting our organisational barriers to one side and just starting to say, how can we start making life better for our population? So it's very much about creating alliances. And the Centre for Applied Education Research is based in our Wolfson Centre on the Bradford Royal Infirmary. And it really is a meeting place where we can bring everybody together. So the Centre for Applied Education Research and Governance terms sits within the Bradford Institute of Health Research, the Wolfson. And that is a formal partnership between our regional universities and all of our major stakeholders. So we sit within that governance structure. We contribute towards the great activity of the Bradford Institute of Health Research, but we also can pull from the support that is then generated from the wonderful infrastructure that John Wright has created. We have a very specific board, the Alliance for Life Chances Board. It was previously the Bradford Opportunity Area, DFE funded programme. That's now being rebranded. DFE now talking about priority areas, and within the priority area scheme in Bradford, we have an Alliance for Life Chances. And that board is there to support our activity, but also to challenge us and to commission research. So our Alliance for Life Chances board really oversees all of the activity that is then delivered by our Care Executive Steering Group. And that's set within a broader context of a whole system approach to using research to really understand how all the various factors that influence outcomes for children and young people intersect and interact. And at the heart of everything we do are our educational institutions, by which I mean our schools, our nurseries, because our methodology is based on the idea that this is where the children spend substantial periods of their time. And we really see schools as key partners in tackling some of the entrenched inequalities and disadvantage that are playing out across our area. So we have a network of 208 schools, our evidence active schools, and we have evidence champions within those schools that we can really start helping to support the schools and the nurseries to pull on very best research and evidence in their decision making and policy making. And because it's a whole system approach, we're really working with all of the various stakeholders to try and see how we can better join up our services around these educational establishments so we can start taking whole system approaches to the most disadvantaged and most vulnerable members of our community. So we're working with the police and the local authority, central policymakers, DFE, DHSC, as well as our schools, as well as hospitals, our services, and importantly, our universities. We've got such an important role to play in terms of being the R&D departments for these various organizations. So by bringing everybody together within this structure, we can really start, as I say, breaking down those organizational barriers and just start pushing at these wicked problems that we're all so keen to tackle. So the CEOs, the leaders of all of these various organizations sit on our Alliance for Life Chances Partnership Board. And that's really important for us because that means that we have the mandates, permissions, and often the resources to act. So one really important thing for us in establishing this way of working was making sure that we had that high level cover, that the CEO of the local authority is supporting what we're doing, the CEO of our hospital trust our chief sort of constable, that everybody is agreeing to allow our practitioners on the ground to start crossing organisational barriers so that we can start delivering health services within schools, for example. So instead of working in strict silos, we can start taking that genuine whole system, multi-service approach to supporting our most vulnerable children and young people. So that's the organisational sort of structure. Within care, what we've sort of done, I identify our 8 big areas, some of which are led by our R&D programme leads on this sort of call, such as Cecile and Amanda. So we've identified 8 areas where we feel our research can really support our organisation. Of course, all of these different areas intersect and interact. So by having leaders from all these different areas meeting on a monthly basis and sharing learning, we're hoping that we can take a far more holistic approach to supporting our different organisations. So there are different research and development programmes. And then we have various cross-cutting sort of themes around policy, around impacts. I'm really pleased to see that Ali's on the sort of call here. So we've got individuals and groups leading these various sort of cross-cutting themes. So we've got a school and setting improvements led by colleagues from the DFE. And so these sort of themes cut across all those different R&D programmes in a way that we think is effective. What that then is allowing us to do is start hardwiring our research and development into the system as a whole. So we are now plugging our different R&D programs into the various boards that sit across our district with statutory responsibilities for the care of children and young people. And again, what this gives us is the mandate to act, but it also is allowing us to ensure that our research and development is driven by the needs of the sort of our system. So our system can now start commissioning the research that it wants to happen, whether it's around looked after sort of our children, or whether it's around air quality in schools. So we start to get that whole sort of system working with us as researchers, as universities, playing our role in supporting all of the activity of our statutory organisations. So that's what we're sort of doing. Very quickly want to sort of flag 3 particular aspects that then start emerging from this way of working. So one is this is allowing us to be very place-based in our research. So typically we want to try creative, innovative ways of applying our research in sort of our settings. It's very, very difficult to do that across the whole district. So what we do is we work in our most disadvantaged sort of communities, and this really allows us to co-produce work with those sort of communities and really engage with sort of communities and use a model of test and learning. So we start in one place and then we start rolling out to other places. We feel that the university's got a really major role to play in terms of the connected sort of data. So again, thanks to the vision of John Wright, within Bradford, we've been very, very blessed in terms of our data resources. And what we've been able to show is that when you start connecting various data sets, education, health, social care, and the like, you can really start understanding those intersections and interactions between things like the criminal justice system, health, education, social care. And it seems to us that this is an area where really you need the academic firepower that is contained within universities to support organisations like the local authority to be more effective users of sort of our data. So we see this as a major role that we can play in our area. And again, we'd love to work with other areas to really accelerate that learning process. And the final thing I just want to flag up is it's given us, I believe, a voice sort of nationally. So working with a number of national partners, but particularly the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, and we've been supporting them to start developing an inequalities strategy and start really putting inequalities on the radar of every individual with a responsibility for paediatrics and child health. And again, you can look at these websites, and I'd encourage you to do just to sort of see the way that we sort of shared learning. What we're now doing is really trying to make solid sort of contributions as this terrible, terrible crisis hits our most disadvantaged communities, communities that we know are already suffering from fuel and foods insecurity, as well as all the other horrible problems that are playing out, which are only set to get sort of worse. So one thing that we do is put on webinars where we support our schools, and we bring together schools, health practitioners and the like. So again, schools can draw on their best research and development when they're sort of thinking about their strategies around mental health or physical health or air quality or whatever the topic is that their sort of priority. So again, just helping us play our role in supporting our organisations. We're just in the process of setting up a commission now. So last year, the Times had their Education Commission, which for our reading was very middle class and probably works fine for leafy suburbs sort of our schools, but we don't think really it reflects the issues playing out across sort of our schools in our more disadvantaged areas. So we're setting up a commission that really looks at the issues that are playing out in our most disadvantaged communities and what we could do to support the schools that serve those communities. So again, just using our status, if you like, as researchers, as honest brokers that can bring evidence to sort of bear to make sure that our voice is contributing towards these national debates. And then finally, we're really trying just to sort of break that sort of gap that I talked about before, where we have the research happening in our ivory towers, and then all of our organisations sort of desperately scrabbling around with no headspace to really do the research or start evaluating this sort of our programmes. So a big part of what we're sort of doing is really ensuring that we have the sort of our policymakers so integrated into our activity that as soon as we're finding the results that we think are interesting, such as potentially the impact of putting air clean technologies in schools, the decreased COVID rates, that the policymakers are aware of those sort of findings and so can act on them. And so we're working with all of our regional government sort of our partners, but also our central government sort of partners. So that's all the work that we've sort of developed across sort of Bradford, and for us it's a nice methodology that we feel we can also replicate across in Leeds. And by joining up the activity in Leeds and Bradford, we feel we really have a structure that can ensure that the fantastic research and development happens within our universities is really plugged in to the on-the-ground activities of practitioners and communities in starting to deal with the disadvantages laid out in the Children and North report. And of course, our real desire is then to link this work that's happening across the Bradford Leeds sort of axis. As you can see, York already an integral part of that. We're working with sort of Sheffield and sort of Newcastle in various ways, but I'd love to see the N8 start to build the structure so we can have some formal ways of pushing and pulling the learning across the whole of the N8 region, so that we can all play our role in ensuring that science and evidence are being used to tackle these dreadful, wicked sort of problems that we have a moral and ethical duty to resolve in the shortest possible time period. And that's where I'll leave it. And obviously would love a discussion and debate on these topics. So if I stop there.
Thank you so much, Mark. That's fantastic. Really brilliant overview of what's going on. So much work going across Bradford and Leeds. Are there any questions for Mark at this stage or anything? Liz?
Yeah, that was really brilliant to hear, Mark, and I look forward to getting your slides to kind of look at it in more detail. Yeah, it was the level of collaboration and the way that you're working strategically was particularly interesting, and we do that too. But I think we do this in you know, the different areas that are doing it strategically. So the ARC is incredibly strategic and is very, you know, does involve local authorities and involves lots of other organisations, lots of health organisations. And then we've got people working in, you know, in education that are also working strategically and connecting up organisations. So my question really is whether you have, whether what you're trying to do is bring in all, you know, all the different disciplines into what you're doing, and not be like we have people doing aging, and they'll have their own strategic partnerships that I'm not part of because it's aging, not children. And I, you know, or so in these, do you have other people doing other strategic partnerships that you're not part of, or is this an attempt to bring it all together?
No, so we have, like you, we have a whole group who are worried about successful aging, got a whole group who are worrying about sort of better patients, sort of better safety. So they have their own. So
they have their own ones as well. So you have those going on as well. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
But our focus is on children, young sort of people,
okay.
And I guess our US sort of P is already working with that sort of a school network as sort of
yeah.
through the hospital. So I guess that's our sort of focus. And what we're trying to do is get everybody working together around that. So it involves the ARC, it involves, you know, various sort of programs, but saying anything that interacts with the school system, let's get everybody sat around the table.
Okay, so you've taken the school system, and is it the school system in Leeds, or is it wider than that?
So right now it's the Bradford sort of school system, but that's what we're now wanting to replicate across Leeds.
Okay, so it's the Bradford school system and going on to other cities.
That's
really, really helpful. Thank you. That's lovely. Thanks.
Yeah, so, but no, that's absolutely our dream. So we have all of our schools across the whole Bradford district, 208 are wired into that. That's what we developed thanks to the support of the DFE over the last 5 years. But we think it's a great way forward. So we just want to replicate that across in Leeds now.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
David's got
thanks. It's amazing and inspiring, Mark, to see all of the things that are happening in Bradford, and I guess across many areas where you're working, there are synergies, you know, across all of the N8 partners, and I think some of the things that we're copying Bradford in many respects, trying to set up a birth cohort and establish that type of linkage, and trying to establish overarching governance structures where these systems can work together, really. So, I mean, I've been in Denmark for the last couple of months, in Copenhagen over the summer, where it's just so striking how the system is so much more advanced than what we've managed to implement in the UK in many areas. And I guess I've come back to conversations in Alder Hey. We had a shocking meeting where some of the nurses gave testimonies about things that they'd seen recently, and they talked about a child having a hypoglycemic episode as they were trying to set up this kid's newly diagnosed regime on insulin. And it turns out the family were sharing the food from this child with a number of other siblings, and there are a number of stories like that about children going hungry on hospital wards. And we got to a discussion around, you know, systems hospitals and schools are concerned with feeding kids. The police service is dealing with mental health problems. So you've got, you know, systems that are dealing with you know, the knock-on effects of failure in each of those units within the system you outline, or within these systems. And I suppose what I'm struggling to see at the moment is what is the evidence that we need to inject into those systems that's going to make a difference in the face of these really grim forces that we're dealing with at the moment, that we set out in the Child of the North report, and whether we're acting at the right level. You know, what's the local area evidence that's going to make a difference to national policy, and what do we need to be doing in terms of case studies to show that the things that we're doing locally can make a difference? Because I'm left with a sense of just wondering whether are we generating the right evidence at the moment? I guess that's the question, and I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what the right evidence is that's going to change the system at the moment, but I kind of felt that what we were trying to do was set out the problems with Child of the North report, and now we need some kind of response to all of those problems, and it needs to be at a number of levels. So I don't know if there's a question in there, but it's just a reflection that, you know, we're all doing a lot. So in Copenhagen, there was a lot of emphasis on complexity. So everybody's talking about complexity at the moment, and the need to understand complex systems. And part of me thinks that's obfuscating some of the need to focus on the big structural drivers of some of these problems, and that maybe we're painting a picture that there's lots of complexity at the moment, and that we need more research. And that's great for writing grants, but is it going to solve these immediate problems at the moment?
So, yeah, the brilliant reflections sort of, David. I would like to sort of share some of our experiences. So firstly, I think the Child of the North report was incredibly important, and we know that it had an impact in our local government and our sort of central sort of government. As you say, what it did is it shone a spotlight on those sort of issues, perhaps was less useful in terms of saying this is what you do about it. What I will sort of say is all of the evidence at our end is that, you know, vulnerabilities multiply. So it's the same families that, you know, you talked about, well, you know, you got these sort of children with early onset diabetes, and we got children in the criminal justice system, we got children with food insecurity. Typically, these problems are again the same families, and one of the things that we keep finding is that there are services that's terribly organised at a local level. They're tripping over each other. So one of the things that I think we have found effective is just helping coordinate those responses. But typically, it's very difficult to coordinate those responses because every organisation's got the blinkers on, and that's where we've been able to play a role with our connected data sets in showing, look, actually, we got our canonical examples, classes in classes. Those kids who are struggling to read are the ones who aren't getting any ophthalmic support. So let's start putting some opticians in schools. And we just finished an RCT that's shown that's effective, that actually that improved reading in those children from those disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think that's where we can really start playing a role as the N8. I'm really, really worried about the present government, as I'm sure we all are. But I think we also need to hold on to hope. There are good people, there are good seniors that are civil servants, etc. But the best one in the world, they're absolutely you cannot, I'm in London right now, but you can't sit in Westminster and develop policies that are effective in Liverpool or Bradford. It's got to be, for me, far more community-based. But actually, if we play that out just in Bradford, you can't do it in Bradford. This is where we take this place-based approach. So, our classic example is 3 areas: Homewood, Manningham, Girlington and Keighley, work in all of those areas. And the way the problems are playing out are so different, because one of those communities is predominantly white British in heritage, one of those communities is predominantly South Asian, and one of those communities is a pretty bi-ethnic mix. And they're all suffering from issues around food insecurity, they're all suffering from issues around safeguarding. But the problems are very, very different, and they need tailored solutions. So even at a district level, it's very, very difficult. But again, this is where I think our researchers, we've got experts in community engagement, we've got experts in the use of data, we've got experts on specific topics, whether it's SEAL's work on, well, what do you do if you've got a family, you've got English additional language, what is the extra support that can be put in there? Or a lot of our work is, what do we do with those children with undiagnosed autism? How can we support their needs earlier? Given that actually, if we don't support those needs early, all of our evidence suggests that they then start getting excluded from school and start to enter the criminal justice system and the like. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think the answers lie centrally. We need to be persuading central government to be making sensible investments and not rewarding bankers. I do think a lot of the solutions will have to be implemented at a local level. And this again is why I'm so keen on the N8 and the Child of the North initiative, because I think we can play a real role in supporting our local governments to start doing that tailored, data-driven policy making with that community engagement, which I personally believe, and I think we're getting increasing evidence, is the way that we can actually change things. So our end David, one of the conversations we're having now with our pediatric team is one of the biggest issues they have is NDAs. And then you start looking at the data and kind of go, it's the same schools that all these kids are going to. Why are we trying to get these kids out of their school up to some hospital that's a few miles away with no parking spaces, no bus services? And now all the conversations like, let's start putting our pediatric clinics in those schools. Win-win across the board, and I think it's those local solutions that will win the day at the end. So sorry, that was a very rambling and piecemeal approach, but I hope you get a bit of a flavour for the way that the structures that we have are helping us genuinely take that whole system approach to identifying and understanding and supporting the needs.
Thanks, Mark. That's really useful. And thanks, David. It's really useful reflections as well. There was actually a follow-up question that relevant, follows on for this from David Leeds, saying, are government departments proving responsive to the Leeds and Bradford work? And I suppose the question is how important it is and how much does that matter versus the local responses you've just been saying, Mark?
We have a really good relationship. So we meet probably weekly with Department for Education, with DHSC. I mean, I'm sympathetic, right? So again, can I just be absolutely clear? I loathe the presence of government, and I just think the current, and the last decade of policies are just absolutely appalling. So let's just put that to one aside. But being slightly sympathetic, and not to the political masters, but to the often very, very talented civil servants who are genuinely trying to make systems work, they're shooting absolutely in the dark. They have no idea. I mean, sat there in Whitehall trying to work out what on earth this policy is going to look like, or you know, they'll you know, again, you can see how it happens. Somebody in the Department for Education is trying to write some kind of plan that looks great on a, you know, one-dimensional piece of sort of paper, and when you actually put it out to the wild, it has all kinds of unwanted sort of consequences. So we've built up a really good relationship with those policymakers and are helping them understand actually what things genuinely look like on the ground. So somebody was asking before about the oral work. So, well, Julia's part of that sort of our team, but Peter Day's been doing some fantastic sort of work on the ground in Bradford, looking at where oral health intersects with our autism sort of our pathways, and sort of showing that the pathways that all of our commissioners and practitioners think exist don't exist on the sort of a ground. And actually, when you start looking, because our autism pathways cross so many of our different organizations, it's the most labyrinth arrangements you could see. And typically, again, you know, policymakers are looking at some abstract sort of data set, but they're not getting the lived experiences, they're not getting the voice of the community. And I think that's a role that we have been able to play. And I want that role to start happening in Leeds, etc., because I think actually the insights that we are driving are incredibly important for central government, and I think they will listen. And going back to one of the points that sort of David makes, I think when we can back up data with those sort of case studies, we start winning the arguments. And again, I think by this type of sort of methodology, we can really start sort of putting challenge back up in a meaningful way, and not just challenging, but saying, this is how you can change things. And we've had some success in that in terms of like the glasses in classes approach, the use of routine educational data to identify children with undiagnosed autism. So they will listen, I think, if you can make a compelling case. And I think as the R&D department for these organizations, we could and should be making those compelling cases.
Yeah, I think it's a really good discussion that we could continue. I think we've been doing some of that data linkage population profiling, and it looks like around 10 to 15% of the population in Liverpool are kind of what you'd term as very, very high risk. And some of the work we've done in Denmark is about 4% of the population. So it does seem, you know, across, there's definitely a group where there are multiple adversities in the perinatal period, and they track forward. And it does seem like we haven't, on the face of it, managed to make those life course arguments and to secure the investment for those populations. So I totally agree that there's a whole lot of coordination that could happen. Yeah, I still find it baffling that, you know, I mean, do you think that's fair that that some people working in these local area systems haven't seen some of this evidence before, and it's not obvious, or that
And I think the other thing is, like, we've got such a high sort of barrier for evidence, and I think, you know, we have ended up in our ivory sort of at our towers, and you know, you just start like hanging around local authority, they're absolutely just firefighting. You know, every day is just dealing with the latest sort of emergency. They've got no headspace. So we're sort of finding that when we're sort of going, can we give you that headspace? Can we have a look? Can we sort of support you? We're being welcomed with open arms. And I think the other thing I'd really like to emphasise, because we started off and we're very tentative when we sort of said to, well, local government or sort of central government, well, there's a bit of evidence here. And actually suddenly realised that actually we're really respected. You know, we are the honest brokers, right? And we are. We don't have a vested interest. We genuinely want evidence and science to be used to help these organisations be more effective. And that's again what I think the NA could be so powerful. We really can be a powerful voice. I think we already have, thanks to you, David, and sort of Kate, and that report. I think we have been a powerful voice in shining a spotlight on those inequalities. What I'd love us to do now is use our power of advocacy to start saying, here are some solutions. You know, and here's the evidence that actually that early investment, you know, for each pound, you're going to get £2 back downstream in terms of your saving across social care, criminal justice systems, sort of our health. I think we will be listened to. But you know, to do that, I think we've got to be really coordinated and acting as one, and acting as the voice for those children, young people, acting as the voice for those disadvantaged communities. And I think if we can do that, we've got a fighting chance of hopefully reversing some of the terrible damage that's being wrought on our country at the present moment.
Can I just come in once? So I agree, Mark, but that makes me think it's more of some of this is more of a translation piece and a packaging of stuff that we've got already, and thinking about how to disseminate that across the whole of the North and locally. And I put that piece of School for Public Health Research and the systems map in the link, and there's another some work, another piece of work that the school has led, speaking to the integrated care systems and the integrated care boards that are emerging around the extent to which children feature in those systems. And I've seen some of it, and clearly they're talking about huge diversity, with some integrated care systems hardly focusing on children at all, and others where they're very public health focused and they've taken a life course approach. And they're the areas you'd imagine where there's a degree of leadership around these issues. So I do think that maybe trying to target and influence those emerging integrated care systems with some of the stuff we know already could be a good lever for change, especially if you know, in anticipation of a change of government and maybe more progressive policies, etc.
I think so. I think the time is really good. I think the ICSs have come along at the right time. And again, I couldn't agree more, David. I think we've got a real role to play in helping them shape their sort of policies and pull on the best existing evidence, but also get them start hardwiring evaluation and evidence sort of approaches into what they're now rolling out.
I'm very conscious of time. I just want to move on to some general discussion question. However, I just want to pick up a couple of things in the chat. One was there's clearly some interest in having a sort of directory of research expertise across the group, and a suggestion that that some of this has already been gathered, and that's right. There has, but I will make that a priority action to look at some of that. And thanks to Cecile, particularly for pointing out the octopus model. I'm not aware of that, but I'll have a look at that. And I think there's a lot of interest in there. And a question just coming from Ali from Leeds, asking about the APPG, the chair and officers. I'll take that away to respond to afterwards, Ali, because we can do that. I'd say the first meeting's on the 19th, so it needs to be, the chair and officers need to be formally elected first. But yeah, I'll follow up with you afterwards about that. So as I say, I just want to, in the last 10 minutes or so, focus on some broader questions. I appreciate that we haven't got much time, but just to think, if anybody has any initial reflections now or want to follow up afterwards, thinking about what everything we've heard today, including the discussion and the presentations, what this means in terms of future strategy development, what should it look like? What have you heard today that could form part of a future strategy? And what do you consider to be the most pressing priorities for us to work on collectively? But also what barriers exist to our working collectively. And I think we've touched on some of these already, but I'd be very interested in any thoughts in the last 10 minutes that anybody has about any of these questions. I will stop sharing that now so we can back on screen, but Nick will put those questions in the chat as well so that we don't lose them. Thanks, Nick. Uta.
Just a brief reaction. I hope you can see me. I'm sitting in a strange position. Anyway, I've got the window behind me. So I've been thinking while listening that certainly the question of whether or not we need more research or whether we actually have enough research is one we should pursue. And I remember we talked about that earlier in the spring, and I think it really is important that, you know, rather than, as much as we may want to do more research, rather than necessarily kind of thinking about new bits, that we need to check a bit more about what we have already. And again, I remember from the conversations via email in the spring that, you know, there's quite a lot that has been done. And I thought what David and Mark, what you both said, seemed so relevant. The point about, is there a role for the N8 at the moment to go and check again very carefully the kind of evidence we have and how, as you said, we could perhaps play a role in bringing it out and making more convincing cases for the evidence, which, you know, may be something where as a university, I think, for example, from a Lancaster perspective, I know these things are being done by colleagues already, but I'm sure there's more that could be done. And you seem to both, you know quite a bit about, you know, where you feel like there's evidence, but it may not be the right evidence, or, as you said, it may just not have, we may just not have been able to convince people that it is helpful and that we have something to offer. So, but I think that's a really fundamental thing for the current kind of NH Child of the North strategy to become a bit clearer about, you know, do we want to go for more research? Is there a need for more research? And if so, where it is? Or is it perhaps more important, perhaps partly through this new all-party parliamentary group, to lobby and to advocate and to make sure our evidence also perhaps is the evidence we have published or accessible in a way that actually makes it useful to others? Or are we just publishing too much in journals where it's not really of relevance to anyone? And, you know, that's just a question.
Thanks, Uta. Amanda.
Hi, it's not really a question. So I'm from the North East Child Poverty Commission, and we're hosted by Newcastle University. I'm not an academic, but we do publish research and analysis, and I have previously worked for a number of MPs over several years, and I think it's hard to overestimate the sheer volume of information that all policymakers are presented with on a daily basis. And I think we're in a really difficult situation at the moment because it's almost impossible to imagine what the world's going to look like in a month's time, never mind a year's time. So do you know what I mean? That the political landscape that you're trying to influence is changing almost on a daily basis at the moment. The challenges that children are facing and their families are changing on a daily, weekly basis. There are so many issues that are absolutely urgent. And I think the other thing is that thing around firefighting is very important, that most people have just spent the last 2.5 years, if not longer, just firefighting all the time. I think we have a government who, it doesn't count for civil servants, but I think they seem to have no interest whatsoever in evidence. So we could keep producing more and more evidence, you know, that they're not interested. But it depends how the political situation pans out. We do have another party who are obviously hoping to form a government who have very limited access to evidence and specialists, and I'm sure would be very appreciative of that support in helping to develop policy. And I don't think we should rule that out. But yeah, I think if it's even possible, given the state of the situation at the moment, even if it was to identify, if you could do 3 things now for children in the North, what would be your top 3 things that you would recommend? Because the Child of the North report was absolutely fantastic, and there was so much stuff in there, but that in itself feels quite overwhelming. Do you know what I mean? So if I was a politician in opposition or in government, I'd want to know, right, you know, what would be the 3 most impactful things we could do now, rather than just more and more and more evidence, I think.
Thanks, Amanda. I think that's a really useful reflection, as you say, on the sort of just the sheer weight of evidence, but also where the focus needs to be. So I think it's something that we need to think about more. Mark.
Well, no, very well sort of made sort of points. At the point of being very, very repetitive, I think let's also think about local governments, though, who I think are far more amenable to using the evidence. I think got a big role to sort of play there. I'd also sort of say, again, that methodology I tried to sort of outline, we found to be effective. Working with senior civil servants who are often on the same side, you know, they will help translate things and put it into language that a Secretary of State will respond to. We've had some recent successes even this week with the new sort of Secretary of State. You know, we're moving away from levelling up, and it's all about productivity and efficiency. You know, but they will help us frame things in a way that hopefully you can ring their bells. And again, I just think we've got a moral. We can only do what we can do, and I think there's a moral obligation on us to try. But again, I don't think we can do it by ourselves. But working with those key partners, I think, is how we can make some inroads.
Thanks, Mark. Anybody else in the last few minutes before we have to call a close? Liz, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to just, because it's coming to the end, and to thank everybody from, I know you're going to do this anyway, Mark, but as one of the speakers, to thank everybody for coming. And I know we haven't been able to hear from everybody and to include everybody in a, and it is very hard on the Zoom anyway, and with 40 people, but it's fantastic the 40 people have come. and it shows us the interest that there is in this. We are really serious in trying to develop a research agenda between us all, between our universities. And I think what was been most important to me have been the questions people have asked, and the comments about the different ways of being strategic, the focus on the place-based and what we can learn from that. We have a North East children's community that is very place-based, that we're learning an awful lot from. And Amanda's question about what 3 things, and there isn't enough time to answer Amanda's question, but I think that's a really good question to end with and to leave everybody with is having heard what you've heard from these universities and knowing your own research, what 3 things do you think we should be doing? And hopefully over the next 2 seminars we're going to have, that then we'll lead into a day together, that we can make the best use of that day and not be spending that day telling each other about our research, because we don't have the time to do that. But we really need that day for actually working out how to work with each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, that was really useful, and yeah, absolutely echoes everything I was about to say. I was just to point out in those last few seconds, in terms of next steps, and again, just what Liz, picking up what Liz was saying, this is the start of a conversation. So this is going to be a series. So our next one is on the 12th of October, 2 and 3:30, and we'll have colleagues from Lancaster and Liverpool speaking then. So it would be great if many of you could join us again for that. And I think we just pick up the conversation and continue there. The other thing to do, if you've not been involved with Child North before, is just to again point out the institutional champions we have, many of whom are here today. So if you want to pick up the conversations with those locally about what you can do through your own university, that would be great. One thing I would point out there, that the Durham representative, Chris Brown, unfortunately is leaving Durham, or possibly already left, and we're waiting for a replacement to be appointed. So we will share that information. We also will be now setting up a mailing list based on people who have signed up today. So we will continue to share information through that. But yeah, there's quite a few actions that have come up today, which is absolutely great. And I'd like to thank Liz and Judith in particular, and Mark, for their presentations, which were really great. And as I say, we'll pick up this conversation again on the 12th of October, and then subsequent dates to be confirmed as well. At which point, thank you. I just want to say again, thank you for everybody for attending, and have a great day. And we'll see you all, as many of you as possible, on the 12th, hopefully. Thank you.